Hello and welcome to another reaction video breakdown. Probably the biggest cancer to science on the internet is Kent Hovind. Fairly recently, T-Jump had a conversation with him, and the thing about Kent is, in 5 minutes he can say so many things that are wrong that you need, probably 30 minutes worth of explanation for it. It's not really a debate tactic, he's just too stupid to say anything that's correct. T-Jump did a really good job with him, but I have the benefit of being able to watch it back and think a little bit. So I'm going to go over some of the major things that he said were false and talk about why.
If you mean there are variations within the same, what everybody would recognize as the same kind of animal, like 30 varieties of chickens or 300 varieties of dogs, certainly that happens, yes. There's variations, but they're certainly limited.
How? In what way are they limited? Kent believes that a few thousand species that came off the Ark became the millions of species we see today in basically no time at all. There's no such thing as a kind, but why can't Kent believe that birds came from dinosaurs if a couple of birds that were on the Ark evolved into the thousands of birds that we see today? It's funny because right away Kent is saying, yes, I believe in evolution, but a type of evolution that allows me to somehow believe in superstitious nonsense, but as we'll see, it actually makes him a giant hypocrite.
If you're talking about microevolution, which I think is a lousy term and we should not use, but they do, then yes, microevolution happens, variations happen within the same kind of animal, but they're limited to the same kind in every single instance.
This thing about micro mutations or microevolution happens, but macro doesn't. I can't believe how dumb it is that people say this. And to Kent's credit, he actually thinks that microevolution isn't a term that they should use, but he still believes that this happens, and it's catastrophic for his worldview. Because do those microevolutions ever go away? No. So one generation has X number of microevolutions. If members that have those different microevolutions mate, well, their offspring inherit those small changes from each parent, but then they'll also have their own unique microevolutions. Remember, the parents had theirs. So what happens after thousands of generations have passed? The differences really can't be enough to produce different genre or families. And the reality is we have millions of generations. Now, Kent would argue, well, that can't get you from, having a plant turn into a person, because he thinks the fact that all life is related means that one day a strawberry gave birth to a person. And I'm not kidding, he actually does think in that way.
Every farmer in the world will tell you, if you plant corn, you're going to get corn. If you crossbreed your cows, you're going to get a cow.
Yeah, if you only watch things happen over one lifetime, you won't see dramatic changes occur. Nobody doesn't think that. Everybody also speaks the same language their parents spoke. But over time, languages evolve into completely different languages. English has many different dialects, so every English speaker produces another English speaker, even if they're slightly different. But English originally came from one or perhaps several dialects of a language that wasn't English. It only became what it is after many generations. It never happened all of a sudden. Do you believe that English has Latin roots? Does that mean that one day Latin-speaking people gave birth to children that started speaking English? No, that's dumb. That doesn't make any sense. Right. So stop saying that animals give birth to completely different animals one day, and that's what evolution teaches.
Anything beyond what we would consider a variation is a religious belief. People have to believe that it goes farther than that, or they believe back, millions of years ago it was different. Evolution is purely religious. There's nothing scientific about it.
A belief system cannot be religious if there is no element of the supernatural, whether it be supernatural powers, entities, or types of energy perhaps that are beyond our comprehension. Magic and the supernatural are never acceptable explanations in science. Science can never be a religion. Not evolution, not physics, not any type of science.
Yes, there are no reasons to believe in evolution.
The fossil record perfectly matches what you would expect to find if evolution happens. There are and always will be gaps in the fossil record, but it only takes a few discoveries to confirm an idea. The fossil record is composed entirely of organisms that don't exist anymore, save for ginkgo trees and a few species of horseshoe crab. The organisms of today got here through reproduction. Ergo, we, all of the species you see alive today, are the descendants of different organisms of the past.
Great problem with it. That's not observable.
Another incredibly dumb talking point. A lot of these things are like technically true, but don't really prove anything. Even observations done in the present are of the past. Let me just claim that as photons move toward your eye right now, a magical power changes them. I'm actually a yellow octopus. You know that that's stupid, but so is what Kent is saying. You forfeit your right to have a conversation when you make those types of arguments, because any of them could be true and no consensus can be made. People that actually have the ability to think know that the way this actually works, the most rational way to think about this is, events that happened in the past leave behind evidence, or they potentially can, at least. We come up with ideas, we look for that evidence. If Kent were a judge and somebody accused of murder told Kent, well, you weren't there, it's unobservable, therefore unprovable, Kent wouldn't accept that defense. He doesn't believe what he's saying.
You said the beneficial ones are going to last longer and the bad ones are going to die out. But what I think you're dreaming, SpongeBob style, that this is going to create something new. You said there'll be new functions that didn't happen before. I'd like to see an example of that.
There are many examples of this. Richard Lenski has observed duplicated genes in E. coli that then mutated and allowed the bacteria to metabolize citrate in the presence of oxygen. Normally, this is impossible. They can only do that in the absence of oxygen. The DNA mutated. This means that information changed, which means we have new information. Now, Kent will probably say something like, that's not new information because it's just a revision of the already present genes, which is a dumb semantic trick that he can use to just deny pretty much anything. However, that logic takes you to places like saying, the sentence, I enjoy laughter and I enjoy slaughter, don't contain different information. The only difference in those sentences is I put an S in front of laughter. But we all know that those statements mean completely different things. It makes no sense to argue, yeah, but you just changed information that was already there. Therefore, it's not new information. Now, in that case, I added something. I added that letter S. But what about anagrams? In anagrams, we have all the exact same letters. We just rearrange them. Would Kent really say that this is not new information? You could argue that the letters haven't changed, and I wouldn't really call the letters just simply existing information, but when you rearrange them, they clearly convey new information. So if genes get scrambled or changed or we substitute something, it's still DNA. Perhaps we still have even the same amount of DNA, but if that causes changes, you have new information. There's no argument against that. Bacteria have had entire genes deleted from their genome. A really cool one involved lactose. The gene for making the enzyme to digest lactose was removed from these bacteria. The bacteria then spontaneously regained the ability to do so. What we have here is pre-existing genes that have some function, mutated and then gained a new function. Any mutation is new information, and new functions also mean the information conveyed by the genes changed, even if you try arguing the DNA is only being reorganized, like an anagram. Humans can digest lactose thanks to a mutation as well, but not all humans. But, once again, he's a hypocrite, and he doesn't believe what he's saying. How did the few species on the ark become the millions we see today? By changing adding information and developing new features and functions.
I don't think there are any new functions that are anything major, just extremely minor stuff, and it's extremely limited. Plus, you'd have to have two of these have this same thing happen to them at the same place at the same time of the opposite sex.
This is just an incredibly stupid argument. He admits microevolutions happen. Those aren't sex specific. Parents pass on half their genes, except for like bees, ants, and termites, during sexual reproduction. Technically, with many species of plant, you can have one parent, but it still does sexual reproduction. So let's just say half the genes come from a sperm or a pollen, and half the genes come from an egg. Well, that means a father can pass on genetic change to all of his offsprings, regardless of sex. And then their offspring and their offspring's offspring do the same thing. They pass down those changes as well. Any mutation or change can quickly become ubiquitous in the entire gene pool. You don't need a man and a woman or a male and a female at the same time. What he probably means is land animals couldn't have evolved from fish because you'd need two fish of the opposite sex to simultaneously evolve the ability to live on land at the same time. And that's because despite having evolution explained to him a million times, he still doesn't get that it isn't Pokemon.
So now the odds of this happening is like flipping coins and getting heads, 2 million times in a row. It's not going to happen. So you have a religious belief and probably don't realize it. You believe that could happen, but that's not science.
What's hilarious is that he's actually saying religious beliefs are false. He's not saying you have to believe it because you can't prove it. He's actually saying it's not possible. And that's why it can only be a religious belief. Well, the odds that Jesus resurrected are less than the odds of two equal mutations happening to two members of the same species. And he thinks that's impossible. Therefore, according to Kent, Christianity is false. And the reason it's false is why it is a religion.
One example would be the butterflies in the islands of Samoa, who one butterfly had a single genetic mutation that caused it to become immune to a certain kind of bacteria, which was a threat to the species. And from that one butterfly, it spread to all the butterflies in the entire species.
Okay. I don't think that's a demonstration of any new information. A mutation that causes resistance to a bacteria could be a loss of information.
So he clearly has no idea. I mean, he admits he has no idea. He's just saying it's from losing information. He's very good at not falling off the script and not breaking character. But let's not pretend like even if they gained information, that would change his mind. He has a script, he has an argument, but that argument doesn't matter. That's actually not part of his belief system. It's consistent with it some of the time, so he repeats it, but the argument doesn't matter. No evidence against Kent's beliefs or his argument would ever convince him otherwise.
Well, I agree. We can move ATCG around and we can get duplicate lines or we can get deleted lines, but I do not agree that's going to cause a new function.
Yep. Once again, Kent is a hypocrite. He does believe this happens because it has to have happened for the organisms on the ark to become what we see today.
So the duplicate information is not a new function. And it's almost always detrimental or harmful or fatal sometimes.
This is just flat out false. 90% or more of our genome is not genes. So a mutation to our genome has the overwhelming odds of having basically no effect on us. Now, what if a mutation happens to part of the genome where there are genes? Are the odds of that going to be that it's detrimental? I've seen scientific papers that have different conclusions about that, but even if most mutations were harmful, that wouldn't matter because of natural selection. If a bug has 1,000 offspring, 900 of them are going to be basically the same, 90, let's say, have harmful mutations, and 10 have beneficial mutations. Those 10 individuals, that 1%, they have the advantage. They will live longer, they will have more offspring that are like them, and so positive changes will accumulate. This is the basic idea behind natural selection.
I think you'll find like people in Africa that have sickle cell anemia are resistant to malaria. Okay, well, both are bad. malaria and sickle cell are both bad. So if someone has one bad thing, they cannot get the other bad thing. Okay, well, that may be beneficial for a short time, but it's not going to help the overall population.
What a lying piece of shit. It's if you have the allele for sickle cell. It's recessive, and you need both alleles to get the condition. Being a carrier doesn't harm you and makes you resistant to malaria. I know that this has been explained to him before because I've seen it.
So if we take a computer code and we delete a line of text, that'll cause the computer code to do something new that it didn't do before. It'll do things differently. Would that qualify as new information?
I don't think you can find a single example of that. I think if you delete a line of code, you're going to crash the whole program. You can't, it doesn't happen. This is dream world. This is SpongeBob stuff.
Notice the attitude here. It's not, I'd be interested to see a study which shows that blah, blah, blah. It's, no, impossible. This is how people that have conclusions already made up and no amount of evidence will ever matter. That's how those people think. Well, Kent, there is a study. There's a gene in humans called CCR5. Some people have a variant of this gene that includes a 32 base pair deletion. Those with this 32 base pair deletion have unique protein structures on their white blood cells and have nearly perfect resistance to HIV.
But no, if you delete a line of computer code, sometimes you delete one character. You can have one character wrong. Ask any programmer how careful they have to be. How easy is it to stop a computer program from running? Any one of millions of things can go wrong. But to say that changing it randomly is going to add new information, that's exactly where you are wrong.
There's pretty clearly nothing that counts as new information to Kent. Ask him what would count. He would have no answer, which could be fine, but you shouldn't have such a strong belief if you don't even know how you could be wrong. Because again, Kent's argument is not that I think the evidence is in my favor. He discounts the possibility of evidence against him. The real reason he couldn't come up with a hypothetical that could disprove him is because he genuinely is incapable of imagining how there could be a scenario where he's wrong.
To delete a line of code in a computer certainly can happen. To say that's new information, that's exactly where you're dreaming. Not true.
See, right here. He's just saying it's false.
You cannot give an example of removing a line of text and making it have a new function. You said that about 6 times now.
I apologize for interrupting, but my butterfly example where it's immune to the bacteria, that's a new function.
That is not a new function. Normally, butterflies are already immune to bacteria. Butterflies are doing just fine all over the world. So if a particular bacteria comes into an area, starts wiping out butterflies of a particular population, and one of them has a mutation, something goes wrong in its code that makes it resistant to that bacteria, you're assuming that that's new information, and it is not new information.
Again, these dumb semantic tricks make it impossible for him to be wrong. This reminds me of the Spanky Bible. If you don't know, this is Spanky. You can actually buy your very own Spanky on my Shopify store. I argue that Spanky is God, Spanky created the universe, all the dumb stuff that apologists say. And I say the truth of Spanky is written on the hearts of all men, but wicked people deny him, and other people are just following false gods and prophets. Whenever I use Spanky as an argument against a theist, they get extremely angry because everything they say, I just say about Spanky, and I usually say it before they can make their argument, and then they realize they have nothing. And here is the Spanky Bible. This book is true. There, that proves it. All of the prophecies in the Spanky Bible have come true and will continue to come true in the future. Ready? Things will happen. No matter what, this will always be validated.
Yes, if you want something brand new, let's suppose you get frogs, a frog that grows wings and can fly. Whoa, that's a new function that frogs don't have. Now it has to find another female frog that also has this function, or else it's going to get weeded out of the population.
Yep, he's unironically strawmanning evolution. He's either so stupid that he is incapable of understanding that's not how it works, that would be the unintentional strawman, or he knows that's not how it works and is saying it anyways, which is a true strawman, which makes him a lying sack of shit.
That is totally incorrect. We do not observe fruit flies having any better or new functions. Go study what they've created. They've nuked the flies and microwaved them and x-rayed them and exposed them to toxins of all kinds. They have never developed a fly, any of the flies, of the thousands of mutations, none of the mutations are better off than the ordinary fly they started with. None of them have new functions. Some have no eyes. Some are blind. Some have 4 wings and they can't fly. Some have no wings. You cannot point to a single example in the fruit fly experiment, which is a classic one because they've gone through thousands of generations of fruit flies, which would be the equivalent of billions of years of human life or whale life or dinosaur life. None of the flies are better off than great-grandpa fly. None of them.
Who says not having wings is negative? I get it that flies fly, but losing the ability to fly could open up a new niche to exploit. It's the equivalent of creating a product that is addressing a need nobody is yet. Then your product explodes. Snakes don't have legs. They are not doing worse because of that. Penguins can't fly. Does that mean that a penguin is a worse kind of bird? See, he doesn't even believe the shit that he's saying. This is slightly different, but there are forced inbreeding experiments that scientists do with, like, yeast. What you find is a graph of their reproductive rate, which is what fitness is, that actually grows wider during the experiment. This means you end up with yeast that are significantly better at surviving and reproducing. This cannot be anything other than a beneficial change. And those changes come about through genetic variations within them. It can only be a result of mutations or changes in gene expression.
So we've observed this. We can observe the better surviving flies just through changes in microevolution, and we can observe it in not just flies, but also mice and rats and all kinds of things, and E. coli and bacteria. And the reason we need to get new vaccines every year is because the bacteria that we had the vaccine to prevent has died off, and one with the new mutation has made it stronger so that it's now immune to the antibacterial. So we see this all the time.
I think you will find that in every case, something that is causing, let's take the bacterial infection, okay? And they develop something, an antibacterial, that will kill those bacteria. And then one of them all of a sudden is not killed by that antibiotic for whatever reason. It is always a loss of information. Go back to my analogy of they're coming through handcuffing everybody, hauling them off to kill them, and you don't have any arms, so they can't handcuff you. Oh, well, that's not it's beneficial for the moment. You get to survive, and eventually the whole population may be armless. And now they can't handcuff them anymore. That would be an example. So now they need a new vaccine. Well, let's get leg cuffs, okay, instead. That's the type of thing you're doing here. You're seeing bacteria that somehow survived against an antibiotic because they had a loss of information. You did not demonstrate they had new information. You demonstrated they survived.
So this response here was utterly pathetic. He said nothing at all. They lost information. You have no ground to make that claim. He's just saying words.
And if you put those bacteria that did survive out into the population of all the other bacteria, they wouldn't survive. They're just against that one particular threat, that one particular antibiotic. In the wild, this doesn't happen.
What? This is in the environment. Antibiotic resistance happens in the environment. His brain just obviously completely short-circuited here. He heard the argument and then he just claimed, well, that's in the lab, not in nature. For Kent to just pretend that antibiotic resistance isn't observed in hospitals with patients, that it's only like done in the lab, I mean, that's so incredibly dumb. I really wish T-Jump would have held his feet to the fire on that one. He didn't, but I mean, overall, he's done a great job. But that one, I don't let people get away with stuff like that, so that was a little disappointing.
Strain of Streptococcus, something or another, it's adapted to become immune to all of the antiviral and antibacterial stuff because it's gained a new function where it can process those things, which could never have done before. It's not a loss of information, it's a new information that's been gained. The Wikipedia is what I'm using right here. It's pretty easy if you could go to it and look at it.
I'll have to see that to believe that. I'd also have to point out that this does not demonstrate that process can be carried on for long periods of time and therefore turn a bacteria to a whale.
No, you wouldn't believe it. You'll say, oh, that's still a loss of information. Data doesn't matter to people like this. It can't matter. The reason it can't matter is because data is the only thing that could convince them that what they believe is wrong, but they're not willing to stop believing what they do.
You really think this process you're describing can explain how we got here? Is that going to form the world? Is that going to create life to begin with? Is that going to change an amoeba to a whale over trillions of years?
Kent has this incredibly stupid argument that in order to prove evolution, you would have to prove where the Earth came from and how the Big Bang created the universe out of nothing. He has like this $250,000 prize, challenge, whatever, to anybody that can prove evolution, and there's like 8 things that they have to prove, including what I just said. We will ignore the straw man arguments there about the Big Bang and all that, and just address the non sequitur. Where Earth came from or how life came to be is irrelevant to the truth of evolution, save for the idea of perhaps like special creation for each organism. God could exist, and God could have planted the first life forms on Earth billions of years ago and then walked away. Evolution would be 100% true, even if that happened.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can see the relation between an amoeba and a whale is the exact same as the relation between you and your cousins and your children and your parents. We can see it in the DNA. We can just do a DNA comparison between you and your parents and see that you both have the same genetic modification that only exists in your family and no one else's family. And we can do the same thing between whales and amoeba or any other species and show they are similarly have a DNA pattern that only exists between that branch of the family tree.
And all of this happened by chance for no reason. What is the purpose of life, Tom? What's going to happen when you die?
Again, irrelevant to the truth of evolution. I think Kent actually might be having a crisis of faith here. It sounds like he knows what he believes about evolution is bullshit, and now he's just denying it on the grounds of, no, I want to believe I get to party with Jesus. This is basically an appeal to emotion.
Kids who believe in God go to public school, and their textbooks say, it all happened by chance. There is no God. The earth is billions of years old. And yet the kids who read their Bible say, no, the earth is about 6,000 years old. That's what this book teaches. And that's what I believe. The dinosaurs lived with man. They called them dragons. People killed them. They always lived with man. How about that's what the evidence really shows? I mean, why are there thousands of legends of dragons? There are also thousands of sightings in the last 100 years or so of that maybe some dinosaurs still alive, like Loch Ness Monster type stuff. I'll watch my video 3.
Even though we can see billions of light years, I think the universe and Earth are 6,000 years old because Loch Ness Monster. I don't even really need to say anything. Sometimes somebody says something so stupid that no counter-argument is required.